Okay, thank you so much for being here. I feel compelled to do something a little different this morning just to start with. The person that's sitting beside you, if you feel comfortable doing this, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, don't do this. But the person that's sitting beside you, will you just turn to them and say, God is faithful? If you feel like it, just turn to them and say, God is faithful. It's just good to be reminded of that this morning. And now, as we start this morning, let me remind you that we have been in a series called Influencer. And the reason that we're talking about this whole idea of influencer is this. We are all influencers. To greater or lesser degrees, we are all influencers. Not in the professional sense of the word. Some of us might be professional influencers, leveraging social media to impact trends and thinking and culture and economy. You might be one of those people, but one thing is for sure, you are an influencer. You have influence. And that influence, you're going to either use that influence kind of by default, or you're going to use that influence intentionally. Your influence is going to be intentional. Now, those of us who follow Jesus, we are not just supposed to be influencers by default. We are influencers on purpose. We have been called to be good influencers. In fact, our influence is like an ambassador. The Apostle Paul said this when he was writing the early church, when the movement that Jesus started was still very new. He said, we are ambassadors of Christ. We shape the thoughts and the opinions people hold about Jesus. If you follow Jesus, you shape the thoughts and the opinions that people have about Jesus. And for that reason, we have decided and we have taken a look at a man named Nehemiah, who is a good influencer, because we're not supposed to be just influencers willy-nilly. We're supposed to be good influencers, and we're not just supposed to be good influencers. We're supposed to, those of us who follow Jesus, are supposed to be good news influencers. And if you're not a follower of Jesus and you're here this morning, you are supposed to be here. God knew you were going to be here before we did. He knew you were going to be here before you did. And I'm so glad that you're here, because you're going to get a ringside seat into what Christians are supposed to be doing and how we are supposed to be following our God and how we are supposed to be influencers that are good news influencers. Last week, we've looked at this man named Nehemiah over all the weeks of the summer. And what we have been doing is we've been looking at this man who was an influencer, and we have been pulling things out of his story. There's a book called Nehemiah. It's about him. And we've been looking into this book, and we have been pulling out of that book and trying to pray into our lives different traits of a good leader, of a good influencer, rather. And we're looking at these, and last week we looked at the trait of relentless resilience. And the reason we looked at the trait of relentless resilience is this. If you set out to do something good, if you set out to build a great team that's doing great things, you are going to meet with resistance. It's going to happen. And in order to face that resistance, you're going to need resilience. And you're going to need relentless resilience. But sometimes the resistance that you get doesn't just come from the obvious places. Sometimes it comes from surprising places, in surprising ways. There are times that if you set out to be a good influencer, you're going to meet resistance, and it's not going to be what you were looking for. It is going to be what you weren't looking for, and you're going to kind of, where did that come from? In those moments when you get resistance from places that you weren't expecting, where you weren't anticipating, it comes from a surprising place and in a surprising way, your ability to control the damage that comes from that, or even avoid the damage that comes from this resistance that comes from unexpected places and unexpected ways, your ability to control that damage, or maybe even avoid that damage, is going to largely depend upon your integrity and your determination. So what today we're going to do is we're going to look at this good news, this good influencer named Nehemiah. And we're going to look at 2 times in his life where he encountered resistance that was not expected. It came from a place that it shouldn't have come from. It came in a way it shouldn't have come. And then there's this other influence that he encounters in chapter 6 that kind of comes from a place you would expect, but it doesn't come the way you would expect it. It's going to happen to you as well. And I don't mean this as kind of some dark, negative thing. I want you to be prepared for it. Because if you set out to do something good in this world, if you set out to matter in this world, if you set out to be a good news influencer, somewhere, some way, resistance is going to come to you, and sometimes it comes in a way that you don't even expect it to come. And so let's look at this first trait today that we're going to look at. Like I said, your ability to control and avoid the damage that comes from unexpected resistance will largely depend upon your integrity, and it will depend upon your determination. First leadership trait that we'll pick up today, we're actually going to pick up two today. The first one is inner integrity. And what this means is that the commitment that you expect of others is first expected of yourself, or oneself, if you're using the follow guide this morning. It's first expected. These of yourself. These people are the most free people in the world. The people that have inner integrity, they are the most free people in the world. And here's why. They don't have anything to hide. They live from the inside out. Most of the culture around us teaches us to build ourselves from the outside in, doesn't it? Especially when we get to be adults. Get the degree, get the job, get the house, get the car, get this, and we start putting all these things, and we begin to live from the outside in. But the people that have inner integrity, they don't have anything to hide. They're the most free people that you'll meet, and they live from the inside out. This is the way Nehemiah was living. And if you've not been with us, understand a little bit about who Nehemiah was. He was this guy that was a part of the Persian royal court, but he had this acute perception that Jerusalem should be rebuilt. That was where his people were from, and he wanted it to be rebuilt. And he goes 1,000 miles from the place where he grew up to restore this city. But he does that motivated by something that is deep inside of him. And so he meets this resistance that he wasn't expecting. And he's able to meet it. He's able to control the damage, and he's able to avoid more damage because of his inner integrity. This was what happened. He became very angry. He says, when I heard this, their outcries and these words, I took counsel with myself. But first of all, he is very angry. Let's talk about what it is that has made him very angry. First of all, he's trying to rebuild a city. He's trying to restore a city. In the midst of this restoration, there is a famine in the land. People do not have enough to eat. And so they begin borrowing money to buy food. But the people that they borrow the money from to buy the food charges them exorbitant interest. Not reasonable interest, unfair interest. So now they have this debt service they can barely pay. And then a second thing happens. It's April the 15th. I'm just kidding. I don't know what the date was, but it was tax day. And they had taxes to pay. And now they have to not even pay their debts back. They have to, what little money they have to pay the tax. And then these savvy business guys or gals that had lent them the money come and take the collateral that they had put up. Their property. They take their property. They take their wine. They take their olive oil. They take everything that these people have. And Nehemiah is hearing about this, and it's making him angry that this is happening. And then you would be angry too if you just let yourself go there for a minute. These savvy business guys that had charged, almost like gouging, had charged what the Old Testament sometimes calls usury on these people. All their money is gone. They're beginning to starve again. All their collateral is gone. The only thing they have left is their children, and these guys begin to take their children. The daughters first. Yeah, right. And this infuriates Nehemiah. You know why it makes him mad? It makes him mad because it's not their enemies doing this. It's not the Amorites. It's not the Ashdodites. It's not any of those guys. It's other Jewish people. It's the Jewish people that are rebuilding the wall alongside everybody else. They've just got a little bit of advantage, so they take their little bit of advantage and take advantage of the disadvantaged. And this infuriates Nehemiah. And he says, so I took counsel with myself. I looked deep inside of myself and said, do I have the integrity to speak to what these people are doing? And he found out that he did. And so he calls them together. Hear me. Again, we talked about this. Great teams that do great things, they talk to each other. They don't talk about each other. They talk to one another, not about one another. So he calls them together. He doesn't write an editorial. He doesn't post something on Facebook. He speaks to them face to face. And he tells them three things. It's the three things that they've lost sight of. It's the three things that I will lose sight of and you will lose sight of if you begin to lose your inner integrity. He says to them, the things that you're doing, it's not good. You ought to walk in the fear of God and to prevent the taunts of our enemies. Three things. First of all, they've lost sight of what's good. They're not doing something that's good. They're doing what the Amorites would do, the Horonites would do, the Ashdodites would do, but they're not doing what Israel would do. What they're doing is not good. It's not helping the cause. They're using their advantage to take advantage of someone who's disadvantaged so that they can become more advantaged. And he says, that's not good. And they should have known better. In fact, they probably did, but somehow they had lost sight of what is good, that Israel was supposed to be different. That they weren't supposed to be like the Ashdodites. He could have called their attention during this and said, remember what Moses said, if among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns, certainly in Jerusalem, within the land of the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brothers. But they had done that and more. And Nehemiah is furious because they just don't even see that this is wrong. But then he goes a step further. He says, you ought to walk in the fear of God. You've lost sight of not only what is good, you've lost sight of God. You've lost sight of the fact that he sees what you're doing. You've lost sight of the fact that he is stronger than you. And what you're doing is absolutely wrong. You're taking advantage of someone who has a disadvantage for your advantage. And someone had to speak up. Because whenever people start moving in the direction that is contrary to God, they are moving at a place and to a place that they will meet destruction. And so Nehemiah says, you've forgotten who God is. You don't respect him anymore because you cannot do this to someone else and fear God. Sometimes it bothers me that we take advantage, the safest place in the world for a human being is a mother's womb. It is where we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we do not speak up for them when we should. We take advantage. We don't look out for the disadvantaged. And you're thinking, well, Blake, you're getting a little political now, aren't you? No, I'm not. Because listen, during COVID, there were people that would walk around and say, I'm not going to wear a mask. And I'm like, I've got friends who are critically, they have an immune deficiency. And if they catch this thing, it could end them. So I'm going to wear a mask. I'm going to put a mask on. And the reason I'm going to put a mask on is because the people that have less advantage of me and their immune system, I'm going to protect them. We stand up. That's what we do. Those of us who follow God, that follow Christ, we stand up for the disadvantaged. Sometimes I think we forget. These people, they had no way to know this, but Nehemiah, he points to Jesus. Remember the first time we ever have Jesus recorded standing up and speaking in a public venue, in a synagogue. This is his text for the sermon. Listen to what he says. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and to recover sight. Gosh, Nehemiah just wants them to see. He just wants them to see. To the blind and to set at liberty those who are oppressed. Everything that Nehemiah came to do in Jerusalem is that verse out of Isaiah that Jesus quotes. But there's another thing that we'll lose sight of when we begin to lose our inner integrity, and it is we forget who our enemy is. These guys thought their enemy was a bank account that might be a little bit lower than it should be in their mind. But they were actually undermining the problem. They were undermining the work, rather, and creating a greater problem. They were starving the people that were working on the wall, and they were actually selling the people into slavery that were working on the wall. And Nehemiah confronts them and says, hey, listen, you know what? We have been buying back the slaves, some of which you have sold into slavery to our enemies. And we've been buying them back. You are draining the resources of the work that we're trying to do. And then he points to his own integrity and he says this, moreover, my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. They're lending. And there's a difference here, I really believe, in the scripture. Nehemiah is not exacting interest from them. He's not doing the usury thing. He is taking his advantage so that he can create advantage. And that's what he's always done, right? When he leaves Jerusalem, Persia, 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem, he is leveraging his advantage for the disadvantage. He says, you need to cut this out. You need to stop this. He looks inside of him and he says, when I look in the mirror, I see something that is true about me that should be true about you. Cut this up. Cut this out. And you know what they say? They look at him and he says, nothing. And then he looks back at him and he says, I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to give everything back. The people, the interest, the wine, the olive oil, the land, everything, you're going to give them back. And you know what the people say? They look straight at Nehemiah's face and they say, yes, we will. We'll do that. We will absolutely do that. Because they're not blind to it anymore. They see it. They want to be those people that are good and fear God and know who their enemy is. So they say yes, but Nehemiah gives them two things. First of all, he gives them accountability. He calls the priest together and he says, swear it before the priest. Swear it before the representatives of the God that we're supposed to fear. And then, long passage, he says there's going to be consequences. We won't read all this because we're really kind of doing two sermons in one this morning because we need to move on to the next leadership trait. But he basically says, listen, if you back down on this, if you go back to these other ways, you need to understand that you're going to be shaken out. You're not going to be a part of what God is doing here. It's a visual image of you're going to be like our enemies because you're acting like our enemies anyway. There's consequences for this. But man, for those of us who would have inner integrity, accountability, and awareness of consequences, they're huge for us. All right, let's move on to the next thing that we see. The next time that we see Nehemiah encounter resistance that is unexpected. That was kind of organizational sabotage. You're going to see two other times. One is just complete conspiracy. The second one is sabotage. Again, inside the walls of Jerusalem. But this one will be intentional. First, let's look at the trait. Your ability to control and avoid the damage of unexpected resistance will largely depend upon your integrity and your determination, but not just any kind of determination, a discerning determination, which is a tenacious focus. That's your blank if you're following along in the follow guide, seeing the best path forward while staying aware of the pitfalls. Seeing the best path forward while staying aware of the pitfalls. Let's see what happens here to Nehemiah. It says, now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, now we're back to the enemies. He was very angry because in chapter 5, the enemies were not who he expected to be the enemies, but now we're back to these guys. And the rest of our enemies heard that we had built the wall. If you remember last week, update, last week we had the whole wall built but only halfway. Now we've got it built to its full height. There's no breach left in it, but there's no gates there. The doors are still open. They're still vulnerable. So with this in mind, Sanballat and Geshem and Tobiah, they need to change their approach to Nehemiah. They need to say, hey, well, Nehemiah, you do have some proven ability there. You're kind of a leader like we are. So why don't you do this? I call this the conspiracy of Ono. Why don't you do this? Why don't you come on out to the country and let's meet at the plain of Ono? And he says, oh no, not going to do that. It's because he has not just determination, but he has this discernment that allows him to see what they are intending to do. They're saying they want to meet. They're saying they want this collegial relationship with him. And he's saying, oh, no. I know what your game is. I know what your end game has always been. And it's been to do me harm. It's been to stop this work. It's been to remove me out of the picture and remove this great team of great people doing a great thing out of the picture so you can continue to take advantage of this city. That's not going to happen. But here's the discernment. There's this proverb, this old Hebrew proverb that Nehemiah probably knew. And it simply reads, the prudent see danger coming and they take refuge. For Nehemiah, he saw the danger coming and he kept on working. This was his reply. He said, I sent messengers to them saying, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. I've got a great team, we're doing a great thing, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? And so they come to him 4 times, and he keeps telling them 4 times, why should I come down? So they think he needs a why. He needs a why. We need to give him some reason to come down off of the wall, to put down his sword and to put down his hammer and put down his saw and get off the wall and come talk to us. And so they return to kind of an old story that they've been telling for a while. He sends them an open letter. He sends this open letter to Nehemiah, and the letter reads this way. It says, it's reported among the nations. And Geshem, you know Geshem, right? He's one of the 3. He's one of the enemies. I don't know why they quote Geshem, because he has no credibility with Tobiah whatsoever, but they're quoting him. Geshem also says it, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. Nehemiah didn't want to be a king, but they keep up with their little story. It says, and you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there's a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports. So let's come together. Let's meet collegially and let's talk about this. And you'll have your power there in Jerusalem and we'll have our power over here and it will be all right. Let's do this. And Nehemiah says, no, I'm doing a great work here. I can't come down. I can't do this. And so he says to them, I didn't said anything like that. You're making this stuff out of your own mind. Because he has this discernment. He's prudent. Their end game is not collegiality. Their end game is fear. They're terrorists. That's what they want to do. They want to terrorize. All they want to do is frighten us. And they think, if you frighten someone, the way those of you who are in the military and work daily with this stuff, you understand. The end game is if we can scare someone bad enough, they'll be less motivated to do the work that they're doing that we don't want them to do. And they're just trying to get their hands to drop from the work. And Nehemiah is having none of it, and he does that most important leadership trait. He prays. He says, but now, God, strengthen my hands. They want it to be weak. You make it strong, and let's keep moving forward. There's one more little attempt at sabotage. Watch this. Now, I went into the house of Shemaiah. He was confined to his home, so I go to his home to meet with him. And I get there, and this is what Shemaiah says to me. He says, let us meet together in the house of God, within the temple. Let us go into the temple, and let's close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you by night. Again, same tactic. Nehemiah, those of us who've gone through this summer listening to Nehemiah, watching his story, they're always talking about killing him. They're always talking about doing this or that to him. And now they're going to try a different tactic. This doesn't have anything to do with keeping Nehemiah safe. This has everything to do with discrediting him, making him unbelievable, damaging his inner integrity. But he has this discerning determination. He knows who his God is. He knows what the rules are. And he looks at these guys and he says, why should a man like I run away? What have I done to run away from? I'm not scared of those guys. Might have a healthy fear of them, but he's not scared of them. He's not going to run. And if he is going to run, he's certainly not going to run into the temple because he's not a priest. He says, how can I go into the temple and live? I'm not that person. I'm not a priest. That was the amazing thing about this influencer named Nehemiah. He was so much like you and I. He's not a priest. He's not a prophet. He's not a king. He's not a judge. He's a guy. And he says, I have no right to go into the temple. And he wouldn't go. And the reason he wouldn't go is because he had this inner discernment. He understood and saw that God had not sent Shemaiah, but he had pronounced the prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had paid him to do it. It was sabotage. He says, for this purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act this way and sin, so that they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. He keeps working. He keeps working with a sword at his side and a trowel in his hand, or whatever implement he was using to build that day. And so does the rest of Jerusalem. They keep working. They keep building. They keep restoring this city. They're resilient. They're relentlessly resilient. But they also have this inner integrity about them, and they also have this discerning determination about them. And they're also a great team that is doing a great thing. Remember, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. Great teams that do great things. They have one thing. They have four things, but one thing that gives them speed. And that speed is called trust. Whenever a team has trust, they move further and they move faster. Watch what happened. Because he wouldn't listen to a lesser voice to do a lesser thing. And because they had this incredible trust in this team, it was attacked, wasn't it? It was sabotaged. I mean, the people were borrowing in such a way that it was hurting people, loaning people, selling people off. And Nehemiah corrected that, and it just grew the trust. Look what happens. 52 days. The wall is finished in 52 days. And when it's finished, city's not restored yet, but the wall is up and the gates are hung, and now they have protection, which means the promise for prosperity is greater than it ever has been, and it sends shockwaves out from Jerusalem through the countryside and through all of those people that had been their enemies. Centuries upon centuries, these people have been derided. They have been rolled over. They have been taken advantage of. And in 52 days, it stops. It's that fast because things ran at the speed of trust. And listen what happens to Geshem. Listen what happens to Tobiah. Listen what happens to Sanballat. They're not going to stop, but when they hear this, all the enemies around us were afraid, and they fell greatly in their own esteem. They didn't think so much of themselves anymore, for they perceived this work had been accomplished with the help of God. Jesus stood on a mountain and preached the greatest sermon that's ever been preached, and in the middle of that sermon, he says, "You are the light of the world. Do your good works in front of men so that they might see your good works and glorify God who is in heaven." You do the works. And if you do the works in the light of God, it won't be about your glory. It'll be about God's glory. It will draw attention to God, the way we do our work. I'm telling you, listen, you're an influencer. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're an influencer. You shape the thoughts and the opinions people hold about God. And these people who had been for centuries rolling over these people, it stops. Well, they're going to keep trying, but it stops. And they perceived that those 52 days had been accomplished by God, because they had remembered what was good. They had remembered who their God was, and they knew who their enemy was. They held on to their inner integrity. Let's talk for a moment as we wrap up. How do we develop this discerning determination? A couple of things. How do we get the determination? Well, it has to do with recognizing that the spirit that God has given you is not a spirit of fear, but it's a spirit of power, love, and self-control. That's what God's will is for you. You want to know what God's will is for you? God's will is for you to be a person of power, love, and self-control. And not only is that His will for you, that's His spirit for you. That's the spirit that He has put inside of you if you are a follower of Jesus. And yes, it will, when you pray to receive Christ, when you give your life to Jesus, it's instant. You begin to feel that power. And you begin to listen to that power. But over the years and over the days of walking with Jesus, you will have to be very intentional around two things. You've got to make space for that voice. You've got to make space for that spirit, and you've got to make time for it. You've got to make time coming to church. You've got to make time getting alone by yourself and reading the Word. And that is how we strengthen ourselves. No one becomes strong instantly. God gives us the strength, but it will not always be instant. We have to prepare. Like I said, there are some resistance that's going to be obvious. There's other resistance that's just going to come out of nowhere. Like, I didn't see that coming. And when it comes, you need to have given space and a place to develop the power of God in you and let that grow, your ability to hear Him, your ability to lean on His strength. And don't buy this lie that we're supposed to be comfortable. Don't get me wrong. I like a comfortable bed. I want that. Y'all have heard about my recliner that lives in Alabama now. It's terrible. But, I want to be comfortable in points of comfort. Jesus is our comforter. But we want to know this power. We got to do hard things. If Nehemiah stays in Persia, do you think he knows the power of God the way he came to know the power of God in Jerusalem? No, he doesn't. We don't even know his name if he stays in Persia. But he does the hard thing. And for you, that hard thing might be grand. It might be, I need to go finish that degree. For you, that hard thing might be simple, but hard. I need to work to restore that relationship. It might be, I think I'm supposed to start that business. It'll be hard. You'll have to depend on His power to do it. It could be as simple as, I've been thinking about volunteering in that class of third graders, but it'll be so hard to do that. I mean, I have to be here every Sunday, and they have runny noses and stuff, and Do it. Do the hard thing. Now, let's talk for a moment about developing this discernment. Discernment basically is prudence. Discernment is basically wisdom. How do we develop it? Well, if you see here, it's all about ask. If any of us lacks wisdom, this is Jesus' half-brother that's writing this, by the way. If any of us lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives it generously without reproach, and it will be given to him. So the first thing I want to ask you to do, or challenge you to do, is just simply ask for it. The second thing that you can do is search for it. How do you search for it? There is a book in the middle of the Bible if you have a full Bible with you. It's right about in the middle if you drop it open. It's a book that is full of Hebrew proverbs. All right, and we call it the book of Proverbs. But there are all these wisdom sayings. There are all these sayings that if we meditate on them, we begin to become a person of discernment. The interesting thing about this book is there's 31 chapters in this book. That means that on any given day, today is the 4th of August, right? I want to search for wisdom today. Just, maybe this afternoon, maybe tonight before I go to bed. Maybe some of you did this morning as you got up. Just open to the middle of the Bible, book of Proverbs, chapter 4, and read and search for discernment and prudence and wisdom. And sometimes all you have to do is just kind of read a couple of verses in, because they're just these collections of wise sayings. And you read 2 or 3 in, you may read the whole thing and come back and say, well, that middle one, that's the one for me. That's the one I need to pray and pull into my life. In fact, before we leave this morning in just a minute, I'm going to give you a prayer that's based on one of these wise sayings. So search for it. And this other one may seem a little odd. Wait for it. I'm not talking about being hesitant. I'm just talking about guarding against being hasty. Remember some of the traits that are forward motion traits of an influencer, of a good influencer. One is strategic silence. When we're strategically silent, it doesn't look like we're moving forward, but we are. It doesn't look like Nehemiah was moving forward when he was strategically silent. It doesn't look like he's moving forward when he's divinely aligning for 3 months and praying and fasting 3 months, but he waits on it. And God gives him the wisdom. When in doubt, leave it out. When you're thinking, should I move forward or I should not move forward? When in doubt, just leave it out for a moment and wait for it. Now, we've done thinking exercises and we've done prayer exercises at the end of most of these. And I just want to walk you through these thinking exercises and this prayer. All right, let's do that. It's at the bottom of your follow guide. This is about taking a piece of paper. This is about taking a piece of paper and just and answering this question. Doesn't have to be a journal. Great if you have a journal, but in what ways might I lose sight of what is good, godly, and truly dangerous? What's my fatal flaw? Where am I most likely to lose sight of what's good, what's godly, and who my true enemy is? And just write that down. Take time to write that down today or sometime this week. Another thinking exercise that has to do about, second question. What lesser voice is calling me to a lesser work? What lesser voice is calling me to a lesser work? There are places sometimes that we will end up in where nothing good can happen to us. If Nehemiah had gone to Ono, nothing good would have happened to him there. There are places that we can end up where nothing good can happen to us. What lesser voice is calling you to a lesser work? Be aware of that. And then these prayers. May I walk with integrity of heart within my house. See, external integrity is thinking, I'm not going to do that because I might be caught. Inner integrity is, now this is who I am. It's who I am when nobody else is looking. When I walk around in my house, this is who I am. I'm going to have integrity that is deep and to the core. It's not about not having something that you regret in the past. That regret will help you build the integrity. Let God forgive it and move forward. But it's about having the absence of anything in my life that is a pattern that I would be embarrassed for people to know about. May I walk in my house, God, with a blameless heart. And then the last prayer. Father, give me wisdom to see trouble coming and to take refuge in you. Those are two proverbs that are just put together. It comes from just searching wisdom. You can do this week. One of the keys traits, the most important trait that Nehemiah had as an influencer was he was divinely aligned. He did not try to get God on his side. He tried to make sure. You heard him, God, strengthen my hands. You heard him today. He did not try to drag God onto his side. He made sure that he was on God's side. So the question this morning, it's a question we need to ask every time we spend this hour together, is, have you given your life to Jesus? Do you have a personal relationship with him? And if you do not, I want to invite you to come forward today. Susie will be standing here. I'll be standing here, and we would love to talk to you about having a relationship with Jesus. And if this is the church that you feel like you need to join, that you want to run hard after Jesus alongside of us, we hope that you would come now. Let me pray, and then we'll stand and sing. Let's go ahead and stand right now. Father, as we're standing and as people are thinking, Lord, we just ask that you would please, Lord, continue to use your Spirit, continue to rather move in your Spirit in people's hearts here today. And Lord, I pray that we wouldn't be called away to some lesser work by a lesser voice. Lord, I pray that we would do the hard thing, God. For some of us, that hard thing will be just simply giving our life to you. For others of us, it may be making a phone call this afternoon. Now, God, I pray if that's someone here today that they'll make that phone call, but I pray that they would do it after they have prayed and waited upon you. But they wouldn't hesitate. Now, God, I pray that in whatever way that you're moving in individuals' lives to join this church, to give their life to you, that they will come forward now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.